So first of all, thank you all for being here today. This is a very important topic that we all believe in the value of it. Thank you as the audience, and thanks for Dubai Islamic Economies Development Center for organizing this, as well as the governments of Dubai and the UAE for once again kind of setting the benchmark and finding ways to bring to the light, bring to the forefront issues that need to be addressed, need to be discussed, and need more attention globally. So as we're all well aware these days, we're being inundated with massive amounts of technology on a day-to-day basis. We're consuming massive amounts of technology whilst continuously developing the next iterations of these technologies at the same time, without a lot of pause, reflection, and maybe without a lot of inclusion, particularly from the Islamic economy's sphere. Right? So we're here to discuss these issues and unpack them, and we're very happy that you're here to join us. My name is Ahmed Dawood, and I'm an innovation management professional, as you could say. My backgrounds are in IoT, wearables, and health tech applications, high-performance computing, and semiconductors. And with me here today are a set of magnificent panelists that I'm honored to call friends. Sophie Lindblom from Innovation 360, who is head of innovation with Spotify, and invests a lot of time and effort in increasing awareness through nonprofits for the increased inclusion of women in technology spheres. Right? And as you can tell by her personal brand, she's a big advocate of being yourself, being proud of your identity, and making that present in the environments of innovation that you are participating in, and not homogenizing an environment of innovation. And you see her iconic brand with the hats and the pastel colors. Everywhere you see that, you know it's Sophie or someone inspired by Sophie. And then we have Aurangzeb Mohammed Ahmed. Dr. Aurangzeb is a assistant professor at University of Washington in artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's what I call a true next-gen Renaissance man, being someone who is the lead curator, in my opinion, globally, of the intersection of Islam and science fiction, and curates the most comprehensive website around Islam and science fiction, alongside his day-to-day work in health tech and the applications of machine learning to digital health. Most interestingly, I think since his father's passing 5 years and 1 day ago, he started this project to create a digital simulation through machine learning and augmented reality and artificial intelligence to be able to simulate and emulate his father. At the time, before he had his children, he knew that he wanted that wisdom of yesteryear that we all took for granted growing up to be accessible in some way to the upcoming generations. And he created this interactive model so that his children and their children after them could gain and learn wisdom and insights from his father's personality through this digital simulation. A true trailblazing next-gen initiative that's been covered widely, and a true project of passion that intersects technology and our humanity. And last but not least, we have Dr. James Fagmus, who's a lecturer at Stanford University in artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's also a former CTO of large health tech organizations, a serial entrepreneur, and someone I consider a go-to person for me as a real deep thinker when it comes to enterprise, business, entrepreneurship, and spirituality all combined. But most importantly to me is that he's a very hands-on, compassionate father of three. And I was talking about this, I like to do intros where I introduce the audience to the human element of the experts they're about to listen to. So without further ado, let's delve into how we can bring together our collective experience and insights into really propelling forward innovation in Islamic economies to the next generation and to the next level, making Islamic economies part of the global narrative and conversation around innovation and leaving our mark and imprint, and discussing what that means for us and what it means if we miss the mark on it and how we can go about doing it. So for Dr. James and Dr. Mohammed, what do you feel the opportunities in your work right now at the very, what some may call, tongue-in-cheek, the bleeding edge of technology, whether it's in population health, in your work in weather simulations? What does this mean in terms of its applications to Islamic economies? When we apply these technologies, what benefit, what value, or what risks do we see within Islamic economies?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Greetings of peace. It's wonderful to be here. It's been a pleasure interacting with my sisters and brothers of the global Islamic economy. As per the question, I think to assess the opportunities of these sort of frontier tech developments, I'd like to think about the Islamic economy as the global economy. I think from a religious perspective, Muslims believe that our religion was sent to mankind as a whole, and I think as a result, the businesses that serve our religion should be a global economy opportunity as well. So when you reframe it slightly that way, obviously the opportunities are out there, they're endless. For example, does a water desalination business be considered a an Islamic economy business? I would say absolutely, whether it serves Muslims or not. I think it solves a global sustainability problem. From more practical opportunities, the first thing that comes to mind for us is really about unlocking the potential of people in the region. I think a lot of AI is dominated by an upper elite. Obviously, I'm a privileged white male in technology, so I have to speak to that privilege, but I think there is an opportunity to move that out of that privileged few. And I think that these developments that are happening here, events like these, the universities that are developing the region can really provide that opportunity to move AI to help solve these, very small problems, to increase my productivity by 0.0%, and move that to more, mainstream problems that can be solved. And I think these kinds of efforts are instrumental for that.
Yeah. Excellent answer. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. So I would actually frame that question slightly differently. So instead of focusing on problems, instead of focusing on technologies, we should focus on problems. So because what happens a lot of times is that the analogy that I like to use is that you should not think of that I have a hammer and now I'm looking for a nail. It should be that you have a nail and now you need a hammer. So just focus on questions like questions or problems like that what are the real problems which are opportunities or solutions which affect the lives of individuals, people, again, not just Muslims, but globally that we can solve. So the technology part actually comes last. Especially in healthcare, we have what is known as the last mile problem. That is actually creating the machine learning and AI models. I would say that many a time that's actually the easy part. Getting people to actually adopt these technologies with use cases which are really helpful and which actually have dividends, especially in healthcare, that can be a big problem. And then to address the second part of your question, that what would be the detrimental effects if we do not adopt or address these or use these cutting-edge technologies? So the analogy that I like is that to think about the effects of the Muslim world not getting into the last three industrial revolutions. The effect was that domination from the outsiders. We had more than 150 years of colonialism. We also missed the boat on other technological breakthroughs like the printing press. So then from that we can just extrapolate that if we were to do that again, then we can just extrapolate what kind of effects it would have on the Islamic world.
But with the exponential rate of growth and scalability of digital technologies today, I think the adverse factor, the risk to us, is that much more exponential then, accordingly.
That is absolutely correct.
Well, so Sophie, as a Swede, a nation that is iconically very humbly innovative, and has a long history and a track record of innovation, and through your work at Spotify and now as an innovation practitioner and consultant, what are some of the ways that organizations, communities, and societies can become more innovative game changers, be able to produce more radical innovations through their cultures or their collaborations together?
Great question. Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be here. Can I start with adding on a third component to the first question?
Absolutely.
It's two excellent answers, and if I add a third, we can highlight the diversity of this panel, I think. So we talked about technology as a driver, right? It's the foundation that enables a lot of different innovations. And then we talk about the problems the customer needs that technology can solve for us. And the last component there is making sure that it fits the market. What are the driving forces that are out of our control that we need to map that technology and those customer needs for it in order to truly make an impact? And it's actually connected to your other question in how do we create the preconditions for this to happen in organizations all over the world. And today you need to figure out what is the role we want to play. What is our ambition? We can't do it all. There's so much happening constantly and at an exponential speed. So we need to figure out, okay, what technologies are important to us, what industry are we in, and what do we actually want to accomplish? And when you can articulate that ambition, then you can form a really clear action plan on how to actually get there. And that's the start of becoming more innovative.
So identifying what competencies you have and what problems you can actually execute on or solve for.
Exactly, because there's often a big gap between what we articulated as our ambition and the muscles we have to do it in our organization. It's if I go to the gym and I say, I'm going to lift 100 kilos. Well, you say, I'm quite small. It's going to be hard for me to lift 100 kilos. I don't have the right muscles for it. But if I know that that's my goal, then I can start building up the right competences and capabilities to lift those 100 kilos. But often we forget to define it, and then we don't map it to what we actually have or what we need to do to fill that gap.
So then, let's say we identify that the driving, there's some great work done here, that was slated for the World Government Summit, projecting out what are the most impactful innovations, how they affect us, they affect societies and governments, and how they interact with their citizenry. So if we identify that some of the most impactful technologies or trends are things that we don't have strong competencies in, what are some ways that industry can drive some of that bridging of a competency gap to drive innovation in the right direction?
It's a great question, and we see that organizations that dare to open up and start working in ecosystems have a great advantage, because then you kind of almost become the spider in the web, but you need to be brave to do that, because we typically talk about IP protection and other challenges. We even see a term emerging called competition, which is you collaborate with your competitors. But some of these challenges we stand in front of, especially to the fields that you're experts in, where it's ethical questions around technology, what path should we go, and how do we make sure that we don't go too far and then we can't take it back. And some of these questions are of that character, I would say. I'm not sure if you have anything to add there.
And then I guess to that, I'll add that culture can be a great driver in motivating people. So especially when it comes to technology or designing technology, there are certain nuances in different cultures, including the Middle Eastern cultures, which are really hard for an outsider to capture. That said, the flip side of that is that can also be source of a blinder. So the canonical example that I like to use is that so a lot of us are familiar with and use the website Yelp. So it's basically reviews of restaurants. So it turns out that so for a lot of Muslims in the West, there's this website called Zabiha.com. It's basically a review of halal restaurants. Zabiha.com actually predates Yelp by 7-8 years. There was nobody had thought about this idea of reviewing restaurants. So I was actually a talk given by the founder, and he said that the mistake that I made was that just focusing on the niche environment, which was Muslims. I actually had the idea of creating Yelp 7 years before Yelp. So because of these blinders, again, these could be, depending on the context, it could be a positive or a negative thing. But just imagine a Muslim guy creating Yelp in the early 2000s, and that being the de facto website that people use for restaurant reviews right now. So that's an example of a missed opportunity.
So that's an interesting perspective, because a lot of times we see that we see successful unicorns or successful tech companies in the West or in the Bay Area, and then we try to adapt that business model and create versions of it that have the cultural relativism and nuances that make it adaptable for our markets, and then roll it out within our markets. But what you're talking about is maybe a situation or scenario where an innovation came out of motivated by an Islamic economy's need, but had a wider applicability. But we just failed to see that. We failed to have that perspective. And maybe, James, you can speak a little bit about this. Is how do we then have a mechanism or a dynamic or a culture of identifying what enterprises or buildings or ventures we can build motivated by our Islamic ethos, our culture and traditions, and build sustainable ecosystems for innovation, for entrepreneurship that grow organically from within our Islamic economies and then have global appeal?
Oh, man. How much time you got?
Not much, apparently.
One thing that I will add to those wonderful answers is the flip side of that. So Zabiha.com predates like we were trying to imagine what would happen if a Muslim designed Yelp. Like, that's just mind-blowing. And sometimes I think we see that in the West. We yearn to, where's the Muslim J.K. Rowling? Where's the Muslim Serena Williams? Where's the Muslim Steve Jobs, et cetera, et cetera? But actually, we do have those. The founder of YouTube is Muslim. He's from Minnesota. One of the co-founders of YouTube, one of the early engineers at PayPal is Minnesotan. One of the founders of AdMob, the first mobile advertising platform that got acquired by Google for $800 million back in the day, which was massive, is Muslim. So we have those, but we don't embrace them as well, because I think one of the Islamic ethos that we've lost is that now we include and exclude people based on what we think is Muslim. Oh, that guy's beard is too long or too short, so no, I'm not. I think we need to go back to our roots of inclusivity. That, I mean, I've spoken about broadly in businesses in general, but I think it is an Islamic ethos as well that we've lost. Like, actually, we became quite petty in that space, and that takes away from our momentum. So I just want to give the flip side of the Yelp, that we have amazing Muslim founders that we don't embrace and take credit for, and we should. Like Steven Spielberg, everybody embraces him as a Jew, whether if he observes Sabbath or not. And we should embrace our fellow sisters and brothers in the Islamic economy in the same way, I think, for us just to build on success. Otherwise, we're always starting from the ground floor.
So you're saying before we start building our ecosystems, we should celebrate those that exist already.
Correct. Yeah. So then really about thinking, I'll just answer briefly with one thing. I think in general, we need to rethink what it means to be a successful startup. I think just from the ideas that we pursue, what's valuable, like a lot of times we look for the West to tell us what's valuable as opposed to looking from within. How do we fund? Like, all of us are very much in the rat race of pursuing VC money. Now, I can tell if for somebody who raised VC money, it is not that glamorous of a process and it's not that glamorous of an outcome. And then also, how do you execute in these companies? I think is quite fundamental and has to be different than how Silicon Valley executes. But I'll just say one thing about copying from or borrowing from successful businesses and bringing them here. And this is a topic that I write and talk about, where I mentioned halalifying unicorns. You take a unicorn in the West and they try to make it halal, and you know, to some extent that's okay, but that can be the only thing we do. That's like the first layer of our religion. Islam is sort of the outward practice, but then there's Iman and Ihsan, which are the deeper layer of our religion, just like deeper layers of entrepreneurship and innovation. And so when we look at Uber, for example, who says that it's a successful model? Uber loses $1 billion a month. My 4-year-old daughter will be very successful if I allowed her to lose $1 billion a month, every month. Like, anybody can be successful on those terms. Like, Uber also treats their employees horribly. It has caused suicides in New York City. Many New York City cab drivers have committed suicide in droves because they spend so much money to get their taxi driver license. And then Uber just, you know, I just come down in my Corolla and I can just do it.
I think it's $2 million for a taxi medallion in Manhattan.
I mean, it used to be considered, you know, a retirement and you know, a nest egg almost. And now it has become sort of a huge burden. So I think our religion, our Islamic ethos in the Quran, you see a lot of mentions of reflection, of thinking. Dulil albab, the people that focus inwardly, right? And that's what we have to do. We have to reflect on this. Is Uber really successful? Our metrics of success have been skewed in a certain way that is very materialistic, very outward, but there are actually tremendous amounts of successes away from TechCrunch, away from the New York Times, that we need to embrace. And those are the models that we can copy, not necessarily Uber or Grubhub or Postmates or whatever.
So what I'm hearing is maybe, you know, in this age of exponential growing technologies and platforms having, you know, millions and millions of users and logins a day, maybe the Islamic economy's innovation, as we build the ecosystem, we also have the opportunity of redefining what it means to be successful, where the metric is not just, what is your bottom line, what's your ROI, and how profitable are you in your share price, but also what is your footprint and your ethical impact, right? So if we redefine the metric to be a successful company as one that also takes into consideration the adverse effects of the innovations it's introducing and takes active efforts to mitigate them, then Islamic economies could redefine globally to the entire world and the West what it means to be a successful startup. And I know, Dr. Muhammad, you talk a lot about the fiqh of algorithms and how we can solve complex problems in AI and machine learning by introducing or embedding them with some of this Islamic ethos around ethics of business, around ethics of human interaction. So could you touch on that a little bit?
Right, sure. Okay. So I guess right now, one of the biggest problems, or I would say one of the most active area of research within machine learning and AI is ethics of artificial intelligence and machine learning. The problem being that, so we have these AI and machine learning based systems which are being, for the first time in human history, being deployed at a massive scale in society. And so these will be making decisions on behalf of humans. So a canonical example of that is, think about driverless cars. So for example, UAE also has an initiative that I think by 2030, 40% of the cars will be driverless. So think of the following. So there's an algorithm or set of algorithms which is driving the car. So in case there's an accident, or there's about to be going to be an accident, the car's algorithms have to make a decision that should I kill this pedestrian versus should I kill these two other pedestrians? So one is, say, an elderly grandmother versus, say, one is a child. Should I save the driver? And different combinations of these things. And so MIT has been running this experiment for the last 2 years where they're asking people from all over the world different combinations of these scenarios. And what you realize is that depending upon the person's background, you'd get very different answers because people have different ethical systems in different cultures. That's just the way things are. So for example, if you ask a person in the West, then for the scenario that I mentioned, they'll say, well, save the child. If you ask somebody from East Asia, from China or Malaysia, regardless of their religion, they will say that because there's more reference for the elderly, save the grandmother. So the question for us as Muslims is that when these driverless cars, these systems, when they are deployed, how will the Islamic ethos be embedded in these algorithms? So these are the kind of discussions that we should be having right now, because once these systems are in place, once the infrastructure is there, it's extremely, extremely hard to actually change the infrastructure.
And I think to that point, the Islamic perspective or ethos has a valuable contribution to add to entrepreneurship when we think that upon embarking upon anything, a Muslim says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful, kind of invoking that quality of compassion. Therefore, if you're beginning, or embarking upon building a new technology or a new business model, you have that idea of compassion first and foremost at the forefront of your mind. And this is a notion that I came to through a failure that I experienced in a previous startup where I wasn't being compassionate enough to my target market. And I realized that I developed this model around compassion and innovation that I need to spend a lot more time with them, embed myself with them, and understand what matters to them and be genuinely compassionate as I build this. So I really believe that we can integrate some of this Islamic ethos that exists for 1,400 years into how we build these technologies in a more compassionate and inclusive manner. And to that point, we were talking about inclusivity, right, and how we can build more sustainable ecosystems through inclusivity. And Sophie, you do a lot of work around ensuring that there's more of a presence and a representation of women in technology. We have a nascent technology ecosystem and innovation ecosystem in the Islamic economies. So we have a great opportunity to be able to succeed where others have failed. And we don't have companies with thousands of employees and 70% of them are men. So how do we now begin, as we're building this now nascent innovation ecosystem, make sure that we have a really strong and equitable distribution and presence of women in our innovation ecosystems?
You can view this from 3 different lenses, or if I need to boil it down. So one is from a competence perspective. We are lacking certain competences that we desperately need to keep this pace of development and do it in the right way, especially when it comes to computer science and fields closer to that. So we need to get a bigger diversity into the universities all over the world, and it's women, but it's also different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, because we need that competence. We need to keep learning. The second one is that more people deserve to know what opportunities lies ahead of them. Often you might be disregarding being an engineer because you've seen that you're this or that, or you're not allowed because of some certain constraints. So one is about opening up for more people to pursue something that they might actually really like and can create a great life out of. And the third one is about the aspect of diversity and inclusion in creating innovation. We know that in order to find those truly groundbreaking things, we need different perspectives. We need different type of people in the room to get that dynamic. Because if everyone is the same, we will agree and we'll move forward, but we'll probably be very mainstream. So those 3 things, I think, summarize quite well why this is important.
And I think one thing that's really important is us as men in technology to not always look to the women and say, so how do we get more of you in here, but start asking ourselves, what can we do? So to kind of put my money where my mouth is, I'm going to ask you guys to say, what do you believe in your industries? You're at the high end of your areas of expertise, and I'm sure you don't see an equitable distribution of women there. What do you believe at your level that we can do to have more women in technology in Islamic economies?
Well, thank you for putting your money where your mouth is and putting me on the spot. I appreciate it.
Change's got to start somewhere.
I can only speak for myself. Obviously, as I mentioned, I am a white male, and I have to speak to my privilege as a technologist. The main thing that I've done, in fact, the last company that I started, Loris.ai, is an all-female team besides myself. The CEO is female, the COO is female. I just hired our first data scientist. She's female, etc. So I think at the end of the day, there are two parts to this. The first part is that when you mentioned before about thinking about the impact of Muslim businesses and thinking about the bottom line differently, I would caution also by saying any one metric can be gamed. When you think about any metric, there's no silver bullet. So if I would say, let me look at the gender makeup of a company, or let me look at the social impact, all these things, people game them all the time. So I think it is really about investing and being present in that process, and these are the Islamic ethos. Like the Prophet ﷺ gave his attention to any person that came his way fully until that matter was over and then he went over. The same thing here. Instead of us running around trying to optimize for many things, what matters to us? Inclusivity matters to me. So for instance, all my PhD students that I graded are female, all of them, without exception. My postdocs, all female, in an academic setting. A lot of interns that came in and went on to work for self-driving car startups, went on to work for Apple. Seer works better because of one of my former PhD students, all worked in my group, in my lab. And the thing that I've done is, again, to look back at the metrics of success, is that, as I said, people have learned how to game, how to look successful. Am I ex-Googler? Am I ex-Facebook? Right? Well, some females don't have sheer access. They don't have access to those things. A female might not be able to be president of the Muslim Student Association for a variety of reasons. So if you're only looking for that, you're going to discredit her because you're putting these metrics, these vanity metrics on her when that's not her. So what I try to do is really spend time dissecting applications and not looking for the traditional things that you would look for that have been, up to this point, dominated by men. So if you keep looking at those metrics, you're always going to see the same white men coming through. I mean, it's just the nature of the game. That's one thing that I try to do, is really look at it. And then when people come in, I try to make sure that they flourish. I think there's a lot of female engineers at Uber. But as you know, this whole Me Too movement pretty much started from Uber, right? Terrible place to work. Mm-hmm. In fact, my PhD student, I told her to go to Apple instead of Uber because of this bad reputation that they had. And same thing, when you talk about culture, for example, I'm Muslim, I'm practicing Muslim. I can't go to Happy Hour in New York City and grab a beer with my colleagues, right? And if you do that, then you effectively excluded me from that bonding and from me flourishing, right? So how do we create the environment that is considerate of others, that are fundamentally different from us to make sure they succeed. So in the success metrics for my students, I had to push them to think about, and I had to speak for them. Sometimes, like the Swedes, there are some females that may not be able to be as boastful about their career. So I have to speak on their behalf for the time being and say, well, she accomplished X, Y, Z. And she didn't really mention that, but here's really what it took for her to be successful.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm hearing three things. One is not just be an ally, but be an advocate, right? And secondly, re-examine your selection criteria. Instead of blindly saying, well, we need more women, so we're just going to hire every woman that applies, understand the challenges that they go through to have to get to these areas and say, how do we redefine our selection criteria so we're not systematically excluding women from the conversation. And I think that's really powerful. And this is a bit cheeky, but we can't be talking about this topic and for me not to mention another female here that's in tech, and her name's Karima and Subhi. If you could just hold her up. This is one of the products that my company builds, and this doll is Karima, designed to inspire young women. And she's a thank you. She's a black female astronaut, and that's her persona. And we hope that many women will be, inspired by Karima and by women like Sophie to be in tech within Islamic economies. And so we're talking about some of these positive aspects, the positive elements, but we touched lightly earlier on the adverse effects of these innovations. Let's look 5-10 years into the future. We built a very successful innovation ecosystem within technology. What are some substantive steps that we can take? And I think we'll close with the responses from each of you. Just one or two substantive steps we can take to make sure that as we build strong innovation engines within the region, within Islamic economies, how do we ensure that these are not backfiring, causing harmful things like robbing people of their livelihood in New York City or affecting family dynamics? How do we ensure that we are correcting for these as we're designing technology? I'll start with you, Sophie.
Sure, I can start. So I think that one of the key things is to work structurally through the innovation process. So you actually start with passion and purpose, you shape some type of strategy, and you go into the ideation phase, you organize, you test, and you develop, and you commercialize, right? So when you go through these steps, you can put some checkpoints in for yourself and see what is our social responsibility here, what are the potential consequences, what can happen to not just run through it. So that's one way of at least being thoughtful. Then, of course, it's impossible to predict everything. But at least try to be mindful of it. And also I think that we need, as ecosystems all over the world, take a collective responsibility, may it be with policies or laws or similar, but so we actually all walk the talk.
So more intentionality than having a deliberate innovation management system and a method to the madness for your innovation, so you're not taking too many risks.
Yeah, it's balancing creativity and chaos, right?
Yeah. Dr. Mohammed?
Right. So I guess intentionality is extremely important, so I will second that. In addition to that, what I'll say is that diversity of thought is also very important, because me coming from a particular background, there are certain things which are obvious to me, but at the same time that also, because of that, I also have blinders, that there are certain things which may be, say, obvious to Sophie or which may be obvious to James, which are not very obvious to me. So if you have diversity of thought, that you can cover that. So I've been, like the various projects that I've worked on, even as graduate students and even now, all of them have been multidisciplinary projects. And I would say that I have learned a lot by, say, working with sociologists or people, physicians coming from different backgrounds, is that, again, the same thing that there are a lot of things within the domain that people may take for granted, which may not be obvious to an outsider. So having that perspective, that diversity of thought, at least covers partly that. That said, as Sophie mentioned, that there are certain things which are just going to be inevitable. There are just too many, for any given project, there may be just too many moving parts. This society is complex. You cannot really predict their interaction, but at least having a multidisciplinary team, you can mitigate for some of that.
Thank you. Dr. James?
That's wonderful. I would say, I'm going to steal this from Dr. Mohammed, but one thing that we have to realize is is that there's a negative side to innovation. Like we're talking about innovation is like this better than sliced bread almost. And we were joking about how innovation in Arabic can be called bid'ah, which is something that's sometimes frowned upon in Islam, to say, innovating the religion matters. And I think that's how you have to take it, with a grain of salt. I'll just use one anecdote to close it out to support this multidisciplinary approach. There was a group of researchers that wanted to innovate and provide this dense protein-rich fish in an African country. There was a lake. They said there's this fish. It's cheap. It's easy to grow. Let's throw it in the lake, and everybody will be able to feed a family of 12. One fish, right? Guess what happened? They went and did that, and obviously that fish cannibalized everything else and had a huge ecosystem disaster. And this paper was published in Nature, one of sort of the most respected scientific papers when they did the experiment. And that shows you how innovation can turn around. Like, this seems like a good idea, but you haven't thought about all the stakeholders. You haven't thought about all the effects, what the system looks like. And in this case, had they done some simple modeling, they would have figured that out. Like an undergrad could have probably done it if they did it. So I would say definitely in tech, people think that tech can do no harm kind of thing. And I think us as technologists, we are responsible to fight that notion, but also bring in the right stakeholders at the table who can provide different perspectives.
And I think today we all ought to know better if we're in tech, right? To not think of, I've seen too many times in too many talks that I've given, people come up to me and say, well, before your talk, I really thought that the tech was, or innovation was an amoral exercise. I'm doing zeros and ones and bits and electrons floating through wires. But that really is no longer a conscionable mindset to have that we really need to shift. So thank you guys for your time, and I think we'll open it to the floor for just a few questions because we got our time compressed. We wish we had more time with you, but let's start getting some questions from the audience. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Any questions, maybe from some of the women in the room? Peter, I saw a hand. No, go ahead.
I think there's a microphone as well.
Oh.
Yeah. Amazing. I feel like we need another 3 hours to really hear from each of you and your journeys and your experiences. So really awesome panel, guys. Thank you. I think from today, just incredible. I want to ask Dr. Mohammed, I just feel super fascinated listening to you when you're talking about some of the things, like what is the fiqh of algorithms and thinking these things, like how people when you hear someone talking like that, where do you go for good suhbah, good company, to just casually discuss these kind of very deep but very important sort of questions? Are there communities you find, because you're exploring Islam and science fiction, which might sound geeky, but no, you might be unlocking really important things that we need to think about. So yeah, where do you go, and what are some things you can share to the audience of how to think big?
So for this, so let me first answer the specific question, and then I'll answer the general one. So for the specific problem or question that you asked regarding, how do we find communities of people who are interested in the fiqh of algorithms? So within computer science, there's this whole community of people who are working on what is known as FAT ML, fairness, accountability, transparency, and machine learning. So the number of people who are working in this area is, in the whole world, is less than 500. And the number of people who are working on this area who are also interested in this and actively doing research from the perspective of Sharia is one. Right.
Thank you for being here.
Right. So that said, so this is I truly and honestly believe that this is the area that we Muslims as a community can really contribute towards because many of the problems which are arising in intersection of AI and ethics is that so in the West we are drawing from 60-70 years of speculative thinking and philosophy of technology. In the Islamic tradition, we do have 1,000 years of history of just speculative thinking regarding not real scenario, but scenario. What if this happened? Then how would the fiqh apply? So we can really, really, really draw upon this. But the problem is that a lot of scholars are actually not even aware that these problems exist. That said, let me just add one more thing, that you would imagine that, say, the Google and the Facebook and the Microsoft of the world have a really good handle on this. That's actually not true, without naming the organization. So I was actually at a research workshop this last Thursday at one of these, again, I won't name the organizations. And we have people all over the world, and I can tell you that people, they are just starting to thinking about this, and nobody has a clue that how to solve these problems. So I think this is a very ripe, really good time for us to actually jump in and address these questions. But I mean, if there are people who are interested who want to explore this, I would be more than happy. And I really do mean, I would be more than happy to like connect you with some people and continue the discussion.
One thing that I'll add to emphasize Dr. Muhammad's point and why this is so critical that Muslims need to be involved is because currently today, a lot of AI and ML is being applied to you without your consent. When you search on Google, you and I will search for the same term and we don't get the same results, but we can't opt out of that, right? So there's all these technologies that are using AI, Siri, etc., that are being done without our consent. So it is very important that we are in the conversation, both for these that exist in the nascent technologies, but also building the next generation of technologies that have at their core Islamic ethos. So it is very important not to think, oh, this is some Black Mirror movie. Like, this is real stuff that's happening. And it's very important to have, the young entrepreneurs, the students in the room, everybody involved to participate in this, including the fuqaha, to participate in these conversations.
Thank you for that insightful response. And we'll have one very last question.
Over there.
Thank you very much for incredible input from all three of you, all four of you, actually. I just want to actually highlight something very important in the whole innovation and entrepreneurship journey, and that is to create the right network to facilitate all those areas that you really need in your ideation process to actually get to your product and then to your client, etc., or to put forward a service. And I also think that also needs a part of education or Muslims or anybody of identity, a woman, a scientist, an Asian, African American, all those, they need to actually embrace their culture with pride. I find I'm a Muslim woman. I'm also very cosmopolitan in terms of background. And I find there is a problem with a lot of people actually being proud of actually presenting themselves as Muslims within their own fields. And therefore, this network of finding people to talk to does, and the people are there, but the networks have not been created because people don't take pride to say and stand up, I'm a woman, I'm a person, I'm a scientist, I'm a Muslim, but particularly as a Muslim. And I think, unfortunately, I find in the last probably 20 years, Muslims have felt a little bit shy to say, I am a Muslim. Women sometimes in the workplace do get not selected, okay, because of the ideology of somebody who would say, well, no, I think a man can do this better, but give a person a chance. And actually to have those kind of networks to voice those similar interests or concerns, or even bring them up for discussion, for people to say, but why this person and not that? And why is the selection based upon gender or based upon religion, race, or ethnic origin? These are very important. The networks do exist, and I do believe, yes, when you find you cannot join a certain network, I think you should create one. And I'm just wondering, are these networks, have they been created? And I think they should be created. And I think this kind of forum should create those networks.
And I think to that point, I think upon closing right now, which we need to, we should start acting on that and network with one another. Please come up to us and talk to us. Get to know us, and let's celebrate our identities, and let's build a strong innovation economy within our Islamic economies, inshallah.
Can I respond
please,
briefly to that?
go ahead.
I think there are two things. One thing that is sad but true is that a lot of people, Muslims who have succeeded despite being Muslim instead of because of being Muslim.
Sure.
And that was actually the catalyst of when we talk about the golden age, people were successful in the pursuit of God that happened to be in mathematics and physics, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that should change. I think, yes, there are now products like Salam Sisters, like all these things that enable you to be your full self. Because if you're pretending to be somebody else, you just cannot innovate. If I'm pretending, unless you're an actor, I guess, that's the only place where you could do that. So I agree with you that we need the networks and we need the environment for people to be their full selves. And we want to be proud of, we want to succeed because we are Muslim, not despite of it. And currently, I think that's usually the rule instead of the exception instead of the rule.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dr. James. Dr. Mohammed, Sophie Lindblom, thank you all very much. Thank you as the audience for being here today.